Hello, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies and distinguished guests. Welcome to Davos and the Euronews Hub. What a delight to have you all with us today. Huge apologies for the slight delay in today's proceedings. We're sending a very angry message to Donald Trump, holding us up. I hope you all made it here fine, because I know there's been a lot of blockades on the roads, but it is a great pleasure to have you with us for this event. Now, Japan is at a pivotal moment, faced with geopolitical uncertainty, technological disruption, and demographic pressure. And the country's pursuing now a bold strategy to strengthen its long-term resilience and competitiveness. At the heart of this effort are 17 strategic fields, from frontier science and digital infrastructure to energy security, defense, and advanced mobility and maritime systems. Now, these are investment priorities designed to reshape how Japan competes, innovates, and responds to any crisis. Today, we'll explore how Japan can move forward from strategy to implementation, how public-private partnerships can unlock private capital at scale, and what this transformation means, not just for Japan, but also for global stability and growth. I'm delighted to be joined by an outstanding panel today, bringing Japanese and European perspectives. So, without further ado, if you can put your hands together as we welcome to the stage Kumiko Pivette, Head of Geopolitical Risk Advisory, PwC Japan. Yoshito Hori, founder and president of Globus University, founding partner of Globus Capital Partners, and chairman and chief executive officer of Globus Japan. Mr. Jolt Davash. I got it right, didn't I? We practiced. I had to have. Well, senior fellow at Bruegel. Thank you so much for joining us. And Jan Hein Christoffel, Senior Research Fellow at Klingendael Institute, the Netherlands. Everybody comfortable? Yep. Mm-hmm. Just to point out as well, we will be streaming this on the Euronews YouTube channel, so thank you once again for making this all possible. Mr. Yoshito, I would like to start with you, if that's okay. Can you begin by giving us some context about the state of the economy in Japan, please?
Okay. First of all, I'm so glad to see all of you. And let me just point out that we have the first female prime minister in Japan. And then we've been told in Davos as well that Japan is a male-dominated society. But not only first female prime minister, we have first female finance minister who was here in Davos. And then the governor of Tokyo is also female. So 3 top positions in public is dominated by females, so which is it's a good thing for Japan.
Girl power.
So we can tell that Japan is an equal society. And let me talk about the economy by 3 points. One is about the stock markets first. Stock markets has risen to 54,000 Nikkei, and then which is twice in 3 years, double in 3 years, and triple in 5 years. So you can tell that companies are making record profit for 5 consecutive years, and therefore we can tell that Japanese economy is sound and growing. Second is about unemployment and wages. Unemployment right now is about 2.6%, which is very low. And same the wage is up by 5%, so therefore we can tell. And Japan has been suffering for deflation for about 30 years, but now we have finally BOJ is raising interest rate, and right now official rate is 0.75%. So we can tell that the economy is booming. Thirdly, let me talk about primary income balance. We have more than $500 billion income balance in terms of dividends and also interest and capital gain coming per year, which is 130% of current trade surplus. And that means even though we lost a lot in terms of trade, we have the largest credit nation, and therefore we can tell that we are rich in terms of the economy. So those 3 things will tell you that Japanese economy is sound. And let me just point out one more thing, is that Japan has become very popular. More than 42 million people visited Japan this year. It's more than UK or Germany or Canada or even Thailand. And that will tell you that Japan is becoming more popular now. Let me stop it right here.
Well, I'd like to ask you one more question,
Okay,
which leads
sure.
on from that, if that's okay. Japan has identified 17 strategic fields to
Okay.
secure growth and economic security, as we heard. And it's a very volatile world. So at Davos, where competitiveness and resilience are top of mind, what makes Japan's approach distinct from other advanced economies who are pursuing industrial strategy?
Okay, I went to Harvard Business School in 1989. And there we studied about industrial policy of Japan. Notorious MITI, they said. And then, so therefore, Japan was so strong in terms of industrial policy. They point out 16 and 17, this time 17, strategic core technology in industry area. And then the approach of Japan is quite different from the US or China. In case of US or China, it's more about top-down approach and pinpoint and winners, and they subsidize them. In case of Japan, it's more about bottom-up approach and more consensus and ecosystem approach. Let me explain about what it is. The approach is mostly like a consortium of leaders, and then let them share information, and let them divide the scope of work in terms of research, and they share the information and also research and findings. And then it's more like an ecosystem, so the whole industries will benefit from that approach. It's not just picking the winners, it's more about picking the industry that Japan should support, and at the same time trying to foster the industries. So it might take longer than other countries, but in the end, the ecosystem will be built, and therefore the stronger fundamental technology and those industries will be built. But it may take them longer than other countries.
A little while, thank you. Kumiko, what feels genuinely new about this strategy compared with Japan's past industrial policies?
All right, thank you. And first of all, thank you for inviting me here for the panel. And I'd like to go back just a little about what he mentioned about the female leader. As my work is all about geopolitics and economic security risk advisory for the Japanese clients, I would have to say that we have one more important female leader, which is the female Minister of Economic Security in Japan. So she is the second one as a female Minister of Economic Security after Takaichi-san. So we have to point it out that too. And back to your question, how is it so different? It is so notable that Prime Minister Takaichi has positioned this economic security measures or strategic investment fields as growth opportunities. So just 2 weeks after her administration is set up, she convened the Japan Strategic Growth Committee. And after 3 weeks after the setup of the administration, she started to convene the expert panel about how to choose these priority areas and how we can form the entire Japan team to tackle this issue. So that's how, and Prime Minister Takaichi actually wrote a book back in 2021 about how to make the Japanese economy more resilient through the economic security measures. So she is really committed to these initiatives, and she wants to make sure that we understand her concept of strategic crisis management investment and growth investment. Growth investment is easy to understand. You can focus on your winning area and grow it more. But crisis management investment, according to her, is that Japan can be a leader in the leader position to countermeasure for the potential risks that not only Japan, but also the other countries globally would face. The economic security challenges, food security, energy security, and all these health and agriculture securities. So we wanted to tackle these challenges with our cutting-edge technologies, the cooperation between public and private, so that Japan can be leading the initiative and show to the other countries how we can complement each other to respond to our vulnerability from the economic security point of view and make it as a growth engine. So that's how current administration is so remarkable compared to the several past administration ever since in 2020s.
Thank you. Jan, welcome.
Thank you.
What? You look scared. Don't worry. They don't bite.
It's the light.
Oh, it's
yeah.
the bright light. Apologies for that, but you look good. What is the strategic landscape and strategic challenge facing Japan and European nations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm with the Klingendahl Institute in The Hague, and we focus on the geo-economic landscape. And I'm sorry to have to say here that the positive outlook for the Japanese economy that we heard it is even more impressive when you look at the outside world, where we see a revisionist China that has been coercing Japan and Europe, weaponizing trade and economics. We've seen a revisionist Russia as well, invading Ukraine and threatening NATO and its allies. And unfortunately, now also it seems that we are faced with a revisionist US administration that is pulling out of the multilateral system. So given all that, with the US leading both Japan and Europe basically into an era of globalization, we're now being led back from that era. And that is quite a challenge for both our regions.
What does that mean for our economic security and resilience?
Well, I think both Japan and Europe are in the same pickle. And that pickle is that our economic interdependencies now have proven to be vulnerabilities. And I see basically three avenues out of there where both Japan and Europe are going to go on. The first is keep promoting and leading the free trade system through the WTO, but also by signing new trade agreements with like-minded partners. The second is we really have to consider more forcefully to also protect our domestic markets against economic coercion and also against the vulnerability against overcapacity in strategic industries. And then the third, and perhaps the most ambitious avenue, is seeking security through strategic investment.
Zsolt, how resilient is manufacturing in Japan and Europe in the wake of the recent global shocks that we've seen?
So Donald Trump has imposed massive tariffs on all over the world, and the news is full of reporting that China recorded the highest export ever. But if you look at Japan and Europe, they are similar and they are doing very strong. I mean, we just looked at the latest November 2025 data for Japan. And export as a share of GDP, again, we have a roughly monthly GDP approximation, was highest in November last year than compared to the previous year. If you look at Europe, you see the similar tendency. So exports to the United States declined, obviously, but overall exports is still doing very well. So it does suggest to me that, I mean, these two economies are rather resilient. And we can also go back to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Again, at that time, exports of both Japan and Europe recovered very quickly. So even though we hear lots of criticism and skepticism about resilience of Europe and also Japan, I think both economies are stronger and more resilient.
I'd like to bring Kumiko back in at this point, obviously, and from a research and analysis perspective, how is Japan's strategy fitting in with the US and China tensions that we're seeing?
Thank you. Yes. It's, well, because I have to always talk about economic security viewpoint, it all comes down to the strategic autonomy and also strategic indispensability. When you think about Japan, actually Japan is really a resource-poor country. It is actually back in 1982, the then Minister of Economy, Miti, sponsored the expert panel who published the report called Toward Establishing Economic Security. We already talked about it in 1980, 1982 because of the threat of Soviet Union, but also because of the oil crisis in 1970s. And we were aware, the whole Japanese government and the business was aware that Japan is actually not really well positioned in this sense. So we had this acute awareness of crisis that we have to work on economic security. And ever since, after that report is issued, actually as early as 1983, we actually started the national stockpiling of rare earth. So we had the system ever since, but there was some momentum was there, but after the fall of Soviet Union and with the globalization flourish all over the world, not only just the world, but also Japan has been backing off from this awareness of crisis. So we were more enjoying and trying to make the most of the globalization. But then, as you all know, 2010, we had a huge shock coming from the rare earth export control by China because of the territorial dispute. And after that, we had COVID, we had Russian invasion to Ukraine, and so on. So the world is now aware of the fact that we have to absolutely have the strategic autonomy and indispensability. So for now, what we are trying to do in the current administration is we need to increase or enhance our strategic indispensability, which means Japanese products, Japanese technology, Japanese know-how is something that is needed for other countries, other territories, other companies, so that we are someone who is needed in the international scene, so that we can have this autonomy by balancing our risk between different territories or topics. So this is what we want to do. It's not about US, it's not about China. Every single country has to be aware that we have to think about autonomy and indispensability. That's what Japan is after.
You mentioned technology there, Mr. Yoshito.
Okay.
You know, what is the state of tech startup now, especially in the VC environment?
Okay. When we go back about 12 or 13 years, when Prime Minister Abe came into power, he focused on entrepreneurship and more in technology and startups. So since 2013, venture capital raised amount has risen 10 times since 2013. It was right now roughly about 8.4 billion in 2013. And now before that it was only about 870. So it has risen by 10 times in 10 years. It's impressive. And at the same time, venture capital return in vintage compared to Europe and also US. Every vintage year since 2013, Japan's venture capital is returning more compared to the US and Europe. So you can tell that there's a strong entrepreneurial movement going on. And let me talk about Globus Capital. I'm also business school president. At the same time, I founded venture capital. In 1999, when I raised capital, that time, it was right after Asian financial crisis. I was able to raise about 20 billion yen, but it was only 90% came from the outside of Japan. Only 10% came from Japan. It was difficult to convince financial institutions, pension funds to invest into venture capital. The last fund we raised is 4 times bigger than the fund in 1999. 90% of capital came from Japan, including government institutions like JIC and also GPIF. And that will tell like a big, like a mega banks like Mitsubishi UFJ or like Sumitomo, and they are convinced that they have to invest into startups, and the venture capital fund is a way to do it. And then that will tell you that the government is serious, and then at the same time is backing entrepreneur movement, and then they are talking about more unicorns coming up, and stock markets are being reformed, and deregulation is going on in most of the sectors, and there's a government body discussing about how to grow the economy, and the growth is one of the top agenda of Takaichi administration. So you can tell that there are new things happening, and tech startups are coming up as well.
Thank you. Jan, how can Japan and Europe continue to lead on free trade?
Right, yeah, thank you. I think EU and Japan are ideally posited to take this leadership role when the US steps back. We have a very successful economic partnership agreement, also a strategic partnership, and we have a regular dialogue on economic security. So the institutions are in place there. We should therefore continue our support in the WTO for the dispute settlement mechanism that is still there now. We should continue together the process towards a possible EU alignment with the CPTPP in the Indo-Pacific. And you see Europe on its own also now being very active, negotiating finally a free trade agreement with the Mercosur region and being in negotiations with India. So that is hopeful.
Zsolt, what EU policies do you think are in place that really foster innovation?
First, we have to acknowledge that, unfortunately, EU as a whole is not really a leader in innovation, but more a laggard. But this is not universally true, and we can learn a lot from them. For example, if you look at Scandinavian countries, in particular Denmark and Sweden, they have highest private research and development spending. In global innovation scores, they rank very, very toply. They have a number of companies which were able to grow from being a small company to mid-size and reaching global scale. So something is known by these countries, and the secret is difficult to figure out. But certainly it's a kind of a combination of good domestic regulatory standards, including labor regulation. For example, in Denmark, there is this so-called flex security. So if an entrepreneur funds a new project, hires a scientist or an innovator, the project fails, he has to pay only 2-3 months of severance pay when he leaves off. In Germany, they have to pay almost 3 years. Now, how would companies go to risky projects in Germany if there's such a big risk? There is some people, including Olivier Costa, is researching that issue. So Europe is very diverse. There are some good examples, we should follow them, but also the European levels, and I was very happy to hear you that, for example, the European Research Council and Innovation Council, which largely follows a bottom-up approach, namely not top-down, setting centrally what are the future innovations and strategic places to go, but rather let entrepreneurs and innovators to come up with ideas, and having an independent assessment of them, I think that's the most successful way to foster innovation.
Kumiko, I'd like to expand a little bit on the risk elements that we've been hearing about. And from a geopolitical risk perspective, Japan's strategy seems deeply shaped by uncertainty, from supply chains to regional security. How are these risks influencing corporate and investor decision-making inside of Japan?
We've been talking with Japanese companies since, PwC Japan has been offering the service of geopolitics and economic security ever since 2016, when Brexit happened, and also the Trump administration 1.0 was there. So that was around the time when Japanese companies started to feel, we thought politics and business is something different, something separated in a two-way, and we can work with each other, but it's not like one integrated thing. But now that we have the word economic security, because now we know all the economic power by the companies, by each country's companies, are really at the center of a competition between the nations. So businesses are now suddenly situated in the middle of the conflict between the nations. So that's back in 2016 or 17, 18, when we had the US-China trade war, the Japanese companies started to feel, something is different. We have to think about something that is outside of what CEOs can control within their business portfolio, and we have to worry about something different. We can think about economic efficiency point of view to make business deals, but all these politicians seem to work based on their principles, based on their logics. So it is something that we have to work on to understand. Otherwise, there will be huge impact and consequences for the business performance. So that's how they started to think about the economic security risk. But still, around that time, they were still not sure. But then the Russian invasion to Ukraine happened, and then that's really the wake-up call because U.S.-China trade war was impacting certain part of Japanese business, but not all of them. But when Ukraine happened, a lot of the Japanese CEOs realized if that happens, maybe something which is much closer to us could happen in some time. And what if? So that was the wake-up call for Japanese companies, and we started to have a lot of requests to work on a project about what's going to happen in the street, and what are the potential impacts, and what are we going to do. Around that time, it was still they wanted to do the crystal ball reading. They needed to know the future, what's going to happen, so that they can be prepared. Then, over time, we tried to talk to the companies. It's not about the crystal ball reading. It's about the scenario planning. You have to have different potential scenarios, and you have to make sure that you compare your strategy with the scenarios, potential scenarios, good and bad, and you have to make strategic decisions until which point you prepare to mitigate the risk, or until what kind of risks you can swallow, still having the business going on. So these are the minds shift over the past 5-6 years. So Japanese companies are getting there, but still we are in the training mode. We are trying to be better prepared for this new type of risks and incorporate that into their enterprise risk management, because it was not there. We were talking about earthquake, we were talking about operational risk, we were talking about quality risk, blah, 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 but not economic security risk. So we, as a whole, as society, we are learning how to deal with it.
Mr. Yoshito, I hope you've brought your crystal ball with you for our next question. Okay. 5 to 10 years from now, how should the world and also separately Japan be measuring their success?
Wow, that's a tough question. Well, first of all, I think AI will come in, and that will determine about the competitiveness of the company and also country. And if you look at AI, the US and China are in lead. They are the first mover. And if you think about the size of the economy, the US is about $27 trillion economy. China is about $17 trillion economy. Japan is about $4 trillion economy. So if you look at the size of it, we have to be very pragmatic to think about how to approach AI. And AI could become like commodities. I think you can use like a Claude or like a ChatGPT or Gemini or maybe like XG Global. You can choose, or Meta or whatever it is. And then it doesn't matter. As long as it gives you the right AI and solution, and it doesn't matter. So it could become a commodity. So Japan is there's such word as second mover advantage. The first mover advantage, you're always getting big, but after looking at the success and failure of the first mover, you can decide on what to be done, and then the cost of the investment will come down, and then after all, if you talk about 5 to 10 years from now on, right now everybody is rushing to use AI, and the topics of AI is dominating the Davos this year, as well as Trump as well, because he's here. But discussion about AI is about, if you don't use it, you'll be you'll be losing the competition. So you have to use it. So the adoption is going to be used. They talk a lot about AI diffusion as well. But even though the AI may advance, and technology may advance, it's a society that has a ability to accept or not is going to be decided. If you talk about AI in Europe, they think about fear or uncertainty, and because they're afraid about losing jobs. The same in the US as well. If you talk about AI, well, we may lose jobs, and then they talk about entry career. They are companies are not hiring and so forth. But in Japan, it's different. Japan is I mentioned about unemployment rate. We have a labor shortage. Labor shortage means that we need to have more foreign people come in. At the same time, we have to utilize more female and also like elderly person as well. At the same time, we have to use AI as much as possible and robotics. And the approach of Japan in terms of AI and robotics are very different from the US or Europe, because we have been used to animation or manga of Atom, like I think Astro Boys, it's translated in the US, and also Doraemon, and the AI and the robotics are friends. So the acceptance of society into AI are quite good. At the same time, Japanese companies are kind of securing jobs by, even though we adopt new technology, we re-educate, we retain the employees, we re-educate it so that kind of like job security is there. So therefore, people don't have to be worried about losing jobs with the technological advancement. So going back to your question about 5 to 10 years from now, what would decide the success would be more about the, number one, about acceptance of the societies, as well as the resilience of the companies. We talked a lot about, like a war in Ukraine, and then, pandemic, and also tariff, and then, their supply chains are being, and also like rare earth embargo, there are lots of things happening, but still, Japanese economy is growing. Resilience and also flexibility of the companies are going to be so much important. Innovation is going to be important. But at the end of the day, I think the societal acceptance of technology is going to be determinantal in judging about the success.
I think you almost answered my next question at the end of your answer there, but I'm going to ask the other panelists if they can, in one sentence, answer what is the single most important factor that will determine whether Japan successfully moves from strategy to strength. So Jan, we'll start with you on the end.
Yes, if I may comment it from a European angle, a success would be if the Japanese ecosystems manage to successfully co-invest with European industries in the challenges of tomorrow for resilience and technology development. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel.
I think the success would come if new innovators and new innovations will be able to bring and also challenge incumbents. In Japan, there are lots of big companies. They are doing well, but I think they also need some shake-up to be more productive, and young innovators can make that shift.
Komiko?
Yeah, I would say, I would echo what the theme of this year's Davos, dialogue and spirit of dialogue and communication, collaboration, because no one state can establish the economic security standalone. Taking sanctions against Russia, a lot of the Western countries are trying to do the sanction, but we had all these large number of nations who didn't participate, and the sanction wasn't really effective at all, as we all know. And just like that, just recently, G7 finance ministers were gathered in Washington, in US, and discussed about rare earth. And they were saying they would start to have a collaborative efforts to establish the resilience for rare earth. And they were talking about price flooring and whatsoever. But for that as well, if we don't collaborate, if one country has to just do it, it just doesn't work. So Japan has the strength and weakness, vulnerabilities, and EU and other countries have the same thing. So we have to make sure we look at the strength and the vulnerabilities from the economic security lens and try to see how we can complement each other so that we can collectively achieve the whatever strategic goal we have. So dialogue and collaboration, I would say.
Mr. Yoshito, last word. Do you have any single most important factor?
Well,
I know you had many earlier.
Well, Trump made a speech today at Davos, and then it's kind of like the U.S. is strong, Europe, so, And then, as you can see, China is also dominant power in the world in terms of economy and also politics and also geopolitically as well. And then Europe and Japan are lots of things in common. And we need to have a strong dialogue, and because both of us are mostly the ally to the U.S., and then at the same time, the U.S. has somewhat like coercing attitude toward Europe, and then also not yet to Japan, but we had to negotiate to lower the tariff to 10%. So I think the Europe and Japan should have more discussion, more collaboration, and then so that we can talk about the issue of the U.S. and China. And then that's what we have to be seeing in terms. In this Davos, not much discussion is going on about climate change. There's not much discussion going on about regulation of AI, and but that we should talk about a lot more, despite the fact that the U.S. might be dropping off, and China might not be so much eager to do it. But I think for the humanity of the world, we have to move forward for discussing about climate change and also about AI regulations.
Great. I think summarizing the conversation today, it's fair to say that Japan's 17 strategic fields represent more than just an investment plan. They're a statement about resilience, competitiveness, and global responsibility in a more volatile world. I guess the challenge now is turning the ambition into action. I want to thank our panelists. Please put your hands together for our fantastic panelists today. And thank you all for joining us here in Davos at the Euronews Hub. Have a wonderful afternoon.